Now, I could tell you so much about your Joan Cogan that there would be no time left for her to speak, and I am seriously tempted, but I shall resist the temptation. And of course, I could tell you that she's Associate Dean of Loma Linda University School of Medicine for International Programs. Doesn't that sound impressive? Remind me to treat you with more respect. Then she has taken heart surgery teams to Pakistan, Thailand, Taiwan, Greece, South Vietnam, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Chile, Hong Kong, People's Republic of China, Zimbabwe, and Kenya. How you like that? Then I could tell you that she has an MD, is an internist, a cardiologist, a pediatric cardiologist, and has just finished an MA in public health. But all these things would only tell you about her as a professional, and I'd like to tell you about her as a person, and I promise that I shall be very kind and no real secrets will be revealed. And don't think I couldn't. Now, Joan is at home in any part of the world. She's an international citizen, and at one point, now just picture this, it was my happy privilege to attend General Conference session in Vienna, Austria, at which Joan was a delegate. And Joan always gets the most out of any situation she's in, and she always rents a car if there's any opportunity. It does not matter whether the driving custom is on the left, right, or in the middle. She will rent a car. And she rented a car and at one point lured 4 unsuspecting and far more timid ladies into the car with the promise that we would visit a very unique section of Vienna, and we set out. And I have Mildred Bradley here who can testify as to the truth of all of this. Now, I want you to know that I have driven with taxi drivers all over the world, including the Arab drivers, than which there is no whicher, but Joan is more whicher. Now, she is actually a marvelous driver, and I will go with her anywhere. But one of us made the mistake of kind of sucking in some air. You know how you do? You know, when there's just a tissue paper between you and the next car, and one of us made that mistake, and that was all she needed. And from then on, every very well-mannered policeman in Vienna, the city of culture, looked at the crazy American ladies and kind of cowered as we went careening out. We were too weak to get out and shop, so it was a lost trip. Then I will never forget the time when I was being even more neurotic than usual, and I'm an accomplished neurotic. I have never had any kind of thing less than a totally terminal thing, even a hangnail. And so Joan was so tired of hearing this that she insisted we do an exam, including a stress test. And I might say the one and only stress test I have ever had, and only one I plan ever to have. And when my young family doctor pleads with me, I simply freeze him with an icy glance. Because Joan and Kenneth sat and talked and had the most marvelous visit. I was put upon a perfectly miserable thing, a bicycle, and the pressure kept being increased. And as the and my idea of exercise is to lie on the couch and watch the Washington Redskins play. And I was, every time I would say, Joan, I'm dying, you'll have to let me stop, she would slap any portion of my anatomy she could connect with and say, keep going. And I turned to her finally pitifully and said, have you ever taken one of these? And she said, don't be ridiculous. And then her optimism, she's so boundlessly optimistic. She is such a joy and a treasure. And I am a walking anxiety attack. So we get along so well together. I must tell you, though, that she's about the only person whose house guest I will consent to be because of my total insomnia and my general undesirability as a house guest. But Joan can put up with it. But at one point, she decided that she would install a burglar alarm in her house. Now, the first time we visited her after this, she allowed us to get in the house, and then she always takes the position that if you explain people to normally intelligent individuals, they will understand. But she doesn't know that things like burglar alarms are impenetrable mysteries to me. And so finally, after a tragedy had been averted a couple of times, I was crawling across the floor on my hands and knees. She claims, by the way, that you have 30 seconds to get to plug, to do the deet, deet, deet that tells the security office that you're legit. You have actually about a second and a half. Anyway, she had gotten so that she turned it off whenever we were there, which I thought was the height of friendship. But at one point, she was going to be out of town, and we had to be in California, and she insisted we stay in her house. And we felt we should leave the burglar alarm on in case something happened, and of course something did. All our instructions deserted us, and in no time, in the dark, these awful sirens. It sounds like an air raid. The whole neighborhood, lights flashed on everywhere in all of Loma Linda. And we called, Kenneth finally, we were both, shaking. Kenneth called the security office, and normally if you say we're Dr. Cogan's house guests, this is all a terrible mistake. They would say, yes, you and who else, and send policemen with drawn guns. But there was a moment of silence when we said, we're Dr. Cogan's house guests, and the men said, mm-hmm. And we knew that she had told them what kind of house guests to expect. And I forgave her with great difficulty, but I've noticed she's never turned the alarm on again since. Her priceless gift of accepting her friends just as they are is what is so wonderful. She never expects us to be better than we are. She is willing to take whatever we can hold up in our little cup. And let me tell you about attending a GC session with this conscientious person. You will sit there until you grow fast to the chair. She will not miss a single official meeting. And when I have said to her, Joan, I will have to lie down on the floor. I am not able to remain upright another instant. She'll give one a poke. Sit up there. Of course you can do it. And I tell you one thing, if the brethren were as conscientious about attending as listening, things might be a little different sometimes. And I always think of her with this text. Strength and honor are her clothing. She openeth her mouth with wisdom, and in her tongue is the law of kindness. And she's going to be embarrassed hideously when I tell you that she's such a thoroughly good person. She's no plaster saint. She's full of fun and laughter and warmth and fun to be with. But I would like to say to the world, this is my friend, Joan Cogan. She is a Seventh-day Adventist.
Oh, I tell you, you have to have strength to stand one of those introductions. And it just reminds me, things are not always what they seem. And the other thing is your first impressions are not always correct. So those of you who know me, you realize that things are not always as they seem or as they've been presented to you here. And those of you who don't know me, first impressions are not always correct. So I actually, when I think of that first impressions are not always correct, I couldn't help but think of an airplane ride I had about a couple of years ago when I was coming, interestingly enough, from Los Angeles to Washington, D.C. And I travel quite a bit on the airplane, and I've learned several things. First of all, I don't talk to the person seated next to me unless they want to talk. That's especially true if it's a man. And so I've adopted that policy, and I take enough things with me so that I'm totally self-contained. I have my Sony Walkman. I have reading material. I have some kind of work to do. I have all sorts of things so that I'm fine even on a 12-hour flight. Well, this, of course, was a relatively short flight from Los Angeles here. I was a little late in boarding the plane, and as I came on, there was a woman ahead of me, a very nice-looking young woman. Actually, she was really beautiful. and she had a pretty smile and quite pleasant. And as I was sort of paddling behind her, and I looked up, and there were very few seats left, and she was looking for her number, the same as I was. And I saw this quite handsome young man, also very pleasant, and he was looking to see who might be coming to sit with him. And he spotted this beauty, and you could just see his eyes light up, and he's smiling and just radiant. And she was looking for the number and went right on past him and seated a couple seats away, and sort of anguish in his eyes. About this time, I'm coming along, and I realize I'm sitting next to him, and you're talking about real anguish now. And he looked at me, and he just sort of, you could just see his spirit fall. And I said, hello. And he said, hello, in a weak, trembling voice. And I sat down, and I thought, well, that's it. I'm not going to give him a peep, because obviously he doesn't want to talk. And during the course of our flight, he would cast glances over to the beautiful young woman who was having an animated conversation with the man next to her. And we didn't say a word. And they finally served food. And if ever you're going to speak, that's usually the time. And he was down so deep he didn't ever say anything. I did have one fellow one time. I got on in London, flew to Los Angeles, 11 hours, I think. I got on, I said to this man, hello. He said, hello. We never uttered another word. The plane landed. He said, goodbye. I said, goodbye, So I thought this is another one of those occasions. And they had said in about 10 minutes we will start our descent into the Washington area. And so I, for some reason, took out my little flashcards for Arabic. Thought since I had frittered away most of the time I'd do something constructive. And so I'm looking through these flashcards, and this deaf mute over here, who had been sitting next to me, said, my goodness, do you speak Arabic? And I said, well, no. I said, I'm trying to learn a little bit. I spend a great deal of time in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, he said. He said, all of my life I've had a passion for that country. He said, I have read about it. I've dreamed of going there. You actually have been there? I said, I go 4 or 5 times a year. Well, with that, he said, won't you tell me some of the things? And so I started to answer some of his questions and so on. And then they say, fasten the seatbelts, we're approaching. And by this time, this poor fellow is just getting almost hysterical. And he said, I want to talk to you some more. And he said, I just can't believe that you know that much about this country. And so I wanted to make him feel as badly as I could. And I said, well, yes, I do. And I said also, it's been a unique experience because I'm a woman, and over there women aren't usually accepted, but I've been to these places and this. Oh, he just went on and on. We're landing, and he said, listen, he said, I've got to talk to you some more. He said, I live here. Is there any way that I could see you and so on? I said, pal, you had your opportunity. I said, we have sat here for 5 hours, 6 hours. And I said, not only that, when I walked on board, I saw that look of anguish that came over your face. I said, I knew exactly what you're thinking. Here's this dumb, fat old woman going to sit here and talk to me about her grandchildren. I said, number one, I don't have any grandchildren. I said, number two, you have shattered all of your opportunities. And I said, just let that be a lesson to you. And he said, tell me this, did it really show that much? Every bit, I said. So, first impressions aren't always what they seem. And this fellow, I might say he was rather cute himself, and I really would like to have spent some time with him, but I didn't have an opportunity. So, he left that plane a better man, and that's what counts. But I wanted to share with you a little bit this morning about the experiences that our Loma Linda Overseas Heart Surgery team has had in Africa. And this past year, we made 2 trips to Africa. The first was in March, and we went to Harare in Zimbabwe. If you're as old as I am, you remember it as Salisbury in Rhodesia, but it's now Harare in Zimbabwe. And there we worked at the University of Zimbabwe Hospital, the Peranyatwa Hospital. And in June, we made a trip to Kenya, where we were at the University of Nairobi Hospital, the Kenyatta Hospital in Nairobi. And people will often say, well, how does that country happen to invite you? And sort of different circumstances each time. In Zimbabwe, what happened was Dr. Salim Farag, who 2 years ago became the medical director for the East Africa Division, well, he learned that one of his former employees, when he was with the state of California Health Department and in charge there, one of his former employees was an administrator of the University Hospital in Harare. So he paid a visit, and they visited, and he said, now I'm here and representing the health department of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and is there anything that I or the church could possibly do to help you in this hospital? And this woman said, well, we've had one big problem. For many years, we've been trying to get an open heart surgery program started here, and we just can't get it going. And, you know, if there's any remote chance that there's anything that you could do to help us with that, we'd really appreciate it. And he said, well, that's something that we really can help you with, that our university has such a team, and they go and so on. And he said, I think that we can work that out. And he phoned me, and everyone agreed, and soon that project was underway. And so that's how we went to Zimbabwe. Now, the way that we went to Kenya was a little bit different. It appears that about, I think, maybe 3 years ago, Elder Neil Wilson, our world church leader, was in Africa, and he had a interview or meeting with the president, President Daniel Moy. And while they were talking, President Moy told him about a certain research fund that he has, in which he has a great deal of interest, that deals primarily with heart disease. And so Elder Wilson was interested in this and told him about our heart team that goes to different countries and so on. And Elder Wilson very graciously volunteered our services for Kenya. And President Moy very gratefully and generously accepted. And so that was nice, and this agreement was made. The only sort of hitch in this was that Elder Wilson, somewhere along the line, neglected to tell us at Loma Linda about this. And time went by, and when I was preparing to go to Harare last year to make arrangements for our visit there this year, I received another call from Dr. Farag, and he said that the people in Kenya had just notified him that President Moy sent the message down, wanting to know why they hadn't heard from us and what was going to happen about our proposed visit. This little secret that Elder Wilson had been treasuring in his heart had not been shared with anyone else. And so I said, well, fine, I'll stop in Nairobi. And so I arranged to meet him there, and that is how that trip came about. Well, as I approached Africa last year on this sort of preparation visit, it was sort of with mixed emotions. I'd been in Africa once before, but that was about 24 years before, and of course things had changed a great deal. Actually, I had had one of the most pleasant days of my life in Africa 24 years ago. And that was in South Africa, actually in a little tiny spot on the coast called Zululand. And I had visited a leper hospital there run by Dr. Frank Engel, who now is dead, but that time was very active in running this hospital. And so I visited there. He's showing me from place to place, and it was a hospital that consisted of many small buildings where the lepers were cared for. It was on a Sunday afternoon, and so no one was working. They were all just sort of lounging around. And I noticed that he was very friendly with the people, all of the patients, and they appreciated and loved him. This one man came up to him after we'd gone through one or two buildings and spoke to him, and Dr. Engel translated it, and this fellow had said, "Is this woman your wife?" And Dr. Engel said, "No, she's a friend of my nephew's, and she's from the United States." And this wonderful Zulu fellow said, "Oh," he said, that's such a shame. She's so nice and fat." And in the Zulu culture, apparently that is the epitome of goodness and loveliness. And so this fellow just shook his head and he said, "Couldn't you take her on as a second wife?" They are Muslims in that particular area, and so that was widely accepted. And he said, no, they have laws in our country and so on. And then this dear, sweet man, just shook his head. "Oh," he said, "what a pity, what a pity." And so he translated this for me, and we went through the other building. And as we came out, I noticed that there was a little bit larger circle of men who watched us as we walked across the lawn and into the next building. Well, it didn't take me long to realize that I was providing a great deal of joy to these men. And it was just absolutely fabulous. I would race through the building. I said, "I don't care about looking at the slides or anything, let's get outside." And then we would walk very slowly to the next building and race through and so on. And these men just would gather in clusters, and then they'd run around to the next building. And, it was one of the greatest days of my life. And so I had these glorious memories as we came into Nairobi, and I thought, I don't know how the Kenyans look upon this, but I had been in Nairobi before, and then during the 24 years, of course, there was a lot of unrest in the country. They had various uprisings, the Mau Mau, and all these terrible stories that I'd read. Of course, some I'm sure were exaggerated, but I had read all these, and I was just sort of a tinge apprehensive, particularly coming into Kenya. Dr. Farrig met me, and the other doctor that was taking us around took me to the hotel and said, now, he was very gracious, "We're going to give you 3 hours. We don't have our first appointment until 1 o'clock. And I had come straight from Los Angeles to London, a lovely 8-hour wait at the airport, 6-hour wait at the airport, and then to Nairobi, and they were allowing me 3 hours to rest and clean up and so on. And I was quite tired when I finally came out and ready to go down and get something to eat before I met them. And here stood this enormous man, black man, standing there. I think that he seemed to me 11 feet tall, but he was probably about 6 feet tall, had on a white uniform, and very impressive. And I came out of my room. He looked at me sort of up and down, and I thought, my goodness, he seemed pleasant, but I thought he was just a little ferocious. I guess it was this lack of sleep and so on. And he said, he didn't say anything at first, just looked up and down, and I thought, well, there's no one here. He may just kill me. or, I didn't know what to think. And he sort of smiled, and he said, Jumbo. And, I smiled, and I thought, if he's going to kill me, I might as well just be going down in a flame of glory. So I said, yes. I said, that's right. That's one way to look at it, Jumbo. And he smiled and so on, and with that, I sort of backed away and edged toward the elevator. And I got in the elevator and went down, and I was really hungry. All of that time change business somehow upsets my appetite, and I was just really hungry, so I thought, I'm going to get something to eat. Go into the dining room, I sit down, and I'm contemplating what to have, and here comes this waiter up, and he looks down at me, and he says, Jumbo. And I thought, boy, they are definitely on a weight reduction program in this country. And so, I smiled, and I said, yes, you're certainly right about that. And they said, what would you like to eat? Oh, I said, just a little light salad and small bowl of soup, hoping that I could sneak something somewhere else. Went out, we did all of our errands, came back, I asked for my key, and again, this man breaks into a smile and nods and says, Jumbo. Well, at first, I thought, well, they've got a burden, and that's their problem. But by the second or third day, I was thinking, now come off it. I mean, I have seen a lot of fat women out on that street that live here, and I don't think they're going up to them and saying, well, Jumbo. And I was sitting there waiting to be picked up by the doctors, and this American woman said to me, she said, my, those people are so friendly to you. They all speak to you. And, I wanted to say, well, sure, they're not talking to you because you're skinny. But I didn't. I said, oh, yes, they're very friendly people. But I kept this up. We were there, I think, 3 or 4 days, and we're on our way to the airport, and I wanted to stop and buy a couple baskets and so we stopped at the local market, and this doctor and I went in, and we went up to this fellow who was literally skin and bones, you see, and this doctor said to him, Jumbo. And I just stopped everything, and I said, for heaven's sakes, I said, why do you call him Jumbo? I said, he doesn't weigh over 120 pounds. And he said, well, what is the matter with you? He says, Jumbo means hello. And I had spent 4 days of total anguish trying to avoid these people because I thought that they were saying these terrible things about me, and they were just being friendly and cordial. So it was a real blow. But I should tell you that both of our trips to Africa were very successful. In Zimbabwe, we were there for about 3 weeks. Our team operated on about 20 patients, all did well. The president's wife, Mrs. Mugabe, came to visit the hospital. She has a real burden for the children of Zimbabwe, and she's a very lovely, gracious lady. And she came and visited each patient, presented them with a little gift, said words of encouragement to them, is a very genuine, kind lady, and was very impressed with what we were doing to help the children and very appreciative of that. She was sort of captivated by the whole idea of our being there and wanted us to come to have lunch with them. And it happened that the president of Germany made an unexpected visit, and so this was unable to take place. And so she had her staff prepare lunch and actually cooked some of the dishes herself, some of the local dishes that she wanted us to try. and then had her staff bring all of this lunch over to us at the hospital the day before we left. We did meet with President Mugabe, and he too was spoke very well about the work of the Seventh-day Adventist Church in his country, and was very appreciative of what Loma Linda had done, and in particular the church had done. We were able at the time of this meeting to give him a bronze model of the Good Samaritan statue, which we have at Loma Linda. I'm sure many of you have seen pictures of it. And the model is about this big, solid bronze, very lovely thing. And we gave this to him, and of course it's a very nice thing for our team to present because it has to do with the health care of the country. And it was especially good for him because he's very interested in the health of the people. Several months later, when he was making his State of the Union presentation to Parliament, he specifically mentioned our visit, mentioned Loma Linda University and the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and said in that address that he wanted us to have a continuing relationship and so on, and the government has asked Dr. Farrig to work as sort of the intermediary, and we feel this is something that is really good that has happened for the church there, and we're grateful that we were able to have a part in that. We also accepted a technician from Zimbabwe to Loma Linda, and this woman trained for about 6 months and has now returned home. She learned to run the heart-lung machine, and it's to enable them to continue their program there. On each of these visits, we take with us about, well, anywhere from $500,000 to $750,000 worth of supplies and equipment. That's what it costs in our country, and it would cost about double that to have those same materials purchased in either Kenya or Zimbabwe. And all of this material is donated by pharmaceutical houses, by supply houses, equipment people, and so on. And I'm always impressed with the generosity of these business people. So often you think of business people being sort of calloused and hardened, and the fact that they give so generously to these other people impresses me a great deal, makes me very proud of our own country. We were big news in Zimbabwe because they had no open heart surgery program there, and we were on the TV, in the newspapers almost every day. And this too had a very beneficial effect on the church. One of the church members said as we were leaving that you have made us feel 10 feet tall. And that was a very nice thing to say and made us all feel good. And this man said, every time we see in the newspapers and so on, we point to this and tell our friends, you know, this is our church that sent these people. And they said the Seventh-day Adventist Church has never been in a higher level of acceptance than it is right now. And so we felt very happy about that. The people themselves were so appreciative. As we were leaving, 3 total strangers came up to me at the airport and said, I would just like to shake your hand and tell you how much we appreciate what you've done for the people. And it made us realize the power of the media. It's good to laugh. Laughing makes you feel good. It not only is good for your mind and for your spirit, but laughing produces physiologic changes in the body, things that you can measure. For instance, laughing will decrease your blood pressure. It will decrease your heart rate. It will increase your general alertness. It will increase your sensory perception, increase your coordination, and laughing produces an increase in your beta endorphins substance in the body, which in turn produces quite significant changes. And as your beta endorphins go up, you have decreased sensitivity to pain, and your immune system is increased, and the response of your immune system is increased, and even your natural killer cells are increased in number. And those are the killer cells that fight cancer and all these sorts of bad things. Well, these are things that people can measure. It's somewhat difficult, but it is actually shown scientifically. And so laughter itself will produce actually some of the same effects as exercise. And so if you're unable to exercise and you have a good laugh, you can have some of the same good physiologic effects, including the post-exercise high. Now, runners and joggers will constantly tell you about that. They feel so good after they quit. And this has been shown because their beta endorphins go up, and this makes them feel unusually good. You can have the same effect with laughing, and that's important. One reason it's important is I think basically exercise is anti-Christian. And now I have a good reason for this. You see, I have been feeling I should exercise, so I go to the fitness center at Loma Linda, and I get up early in the morning, which I don't like, but I do, and I go driving down to the fitness center, where I go in, and really, a fitness center is a good name for it. Everyone there is extremely fit, except myself. And there are all these thin little people, these women with these tight leotards, and they come prancing in there and do all this stuff. And I'm just hanging onto the treadmill for survival, but there they are. And I go in there, and I walk my 2 miles, and I ride the bicycle and stuff, and I drive home. And people are always saying, don't you feel better on an exercise program? Absolutely not. When I leave there, I'm tired, I'm sort of sweaty, and, I'm disappointed because I've seen all these little people running around and everything. And my spirits aren't the best. My legs are throbbing a little bit. But the good feeling you have is that of superiority, because you have gotten out of bed and come down there, and as you drive home, your neighbors are beginning to turn on their lights, and you feel superior. And that is the good feeling that all these exercise people talk about. It's nothing physiologic. It's this superior feeling, which is basically an anti-Christian feeling. And that's why I feel rather strongly about it. Now, of course, we've all read the books by Norman Cousins and his work on the healing effect of laughter. And that is a significant thing. And as I told you, the different things that come from laughter, the different physiologic effects, do promote healing. The other thing that impresses me about Norman Cousins' work, he stresses it's not only laughter, it's any positive force will produce the same effect. And in discussing this with him, I said, well, what about faith and prayer? And he said, exactly. He said, because it will produce some of the same physiologic changes. He actually is very interested in work that is going on at Loma Linda University. The people in our immunology lab are studying the effects of laughter and the effects on stress and the immune system. They've produced some interesting results. You may have seen on the 60 Minutes, I think it was 6 or 9 months ago, they had a segment on some of this work, which is extremely interesting, and they'll measure these beta endorphins in people. They took a group of students, and they said, now we're going to take you and we're going to see the effect of laughing, and they had some movies they were going to show these people, and they scheduled this for a Saturday night in the lab. And the fascinating thing is that they didn't tell the people. They said half of you will watch a serious movie and the other half will watch a comedy thing, but they didn't tell them which was which. And the fascinating thing is that when they came in, they all did baseline levels, and everyone had a higher than normal level, simply because the anticipation of this evening of fun, and each one assumed that he would be the one to watch the fun things, just the anticipation had raised the level of their beta endorphins. So the baseline was way up, and they had to measure them again sometime when they didn't know that they were apt to be laughing. But just thinking about it was able to produce this. Well, whenever I think about laughter and the effects of laughing and so on, I'm very concerned about one thing, and that is that, there are certain texts missing from the Bible. There are quite a few that I think should be in there, but one that troubles me the most is that it never says Jesus laughed. Now, there's no doubt in my mind that Jesus laughed, and laughed a great deal. You can't tell me that a man who would attract children would be a gloomy, unpleasant person. He had to be a smiling, laughing person. And to have children come and sit on his lap, and a man who would say, "Suffer little children to come unto me," has to be the kind of person who would tickle a child or coo with a baby and so on. And this had to be a happy person. Fortunately, I found other people agree with me. Dr. Elton Trueblood, the famous Quaker minister, actually wrote a book entitled The Humor of Christ. And he said that not only did Christ laugh, but he expected other people to laugh as well. Last month in the Adventist Review, I read this article by Russell Argent, who wrote the title, "The Christ Who Laughs." In it, he said, one never sees a picture of a laughing Christ. Actually, there is a Catholic priest who's made a study of this, and he has accumulated all of the pictures that he can that show Christ smiling or actually laughing. And not only does he collect them, but he encourages artists to draw new ones, and he stresses this aspect of it. You read in the Bible, and there's constant reference to laughing, starting with Sarah in Genesis, who laughed, and going on in Job and Proverbs. There are many texts that come to mind. I don't know why the New Testament authors never recorded the fact that Jesus laughed, but it's a serious omission because I know it's really true. Christ was joyful and happy, and we should be too, because after all, we've each been promised eternal life, and we are children of a loving God who cares about us. He cares about our sadness and our happiness, our joys and our woes. Even the very hairs of our head are numbered. And so there's no way that if we really believe that, we can reflect the gloom and the cynicism and the despair that exists in our world today. It's true we'll all have periods of sadness, and that's good for us too, or it wouldn't occur. But God in His mercy has given us laughter and a sense of humor to help compensate for that and to help overcome it. After all, we have to remember the devil can't stand the sound of laughter, but it is definitely a delight to the Lord. And so I encourage us to laugh because it's good for us. And it's good for us physiologically, psychologically. It can actually produce measurable changes in the body that help us not only fight gloom, but help us fight disease. So my concern is that we not only laugh, but be happy and at peace, because after all, we have the assurance that God not only loves us, but that he cares for us and has promised us eternal life.